How's it going, everybody? It's time for another fun-filled and wonderful Mr. Poestyle video. And today we are going to talk about WWF Wrestling, or now as it's known as WWE Wrestling since it's changed. But it was absolutely huge in the 80s. Well, I'm sure it's probably still huge now. I don't really keep up on that, not for the past 20-some years. But when I was a kid, it got huge, and that was with the birth of Hulk Hogan. You know, he got the championship from the Iron Sheik back in the day, and it became huge. Now, we had our ABC, CBS, and NBC affiliate, and WQED Pittsburgh, which was, you know, WQED, or Channel 13 here in Pittsburgh with our Mr. Rogers and whatnot. And those were the channels that we had for years. Now, we live about 40-some miles outside of Pittsburgh. We live out of town. We did not have cable back then. Our family didn't get cable till years later, till like my sophomore year of high school. So we had those channels to choose from. We watched what was on those channels. Played a lot of Atari to fill the time, Atari 2600. And then one day, we discovered the UHF channel, Channel 22, out of Pittsburgh, and Channel 53 out of Pittsburgh, or a closer area to us. The UHF channels were something that were different. They were harder to get. We didn't even have an antenna on our roof. We had rabbit ears. So somehow at one point, one of us out of the four of us kids discovered the UHF channels, and wrestling was one of the first things. I mean, we also had Channel 53 had Suspense Theater, which was scary old movies that scared the crap out of us on Saturday afternoons. They would do a lot of like Blondie movies, Blondie and Dagwood, Abbott and Costello, you know, on Sunday afternoons. The Three Stooges was huge. We discovered that. And wrestling was something that we discovered that we just had to watch. Now, if you don't know, if you're younger and you don't know what UHF is, you had a couple of dials on your old tube CRT, cathode ray tube televisions. You had your main channels on one dial. Channel 2 for us was CBS. ABC, Channel 4. NBC, we actually had two of those, one out of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and one out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that was Channel 6 and 11, and then Channel 13. Well, if you turned that dial, a lot of times on these old TVs, it was a U for UHF, ultra high frequency. The basic channels were on VHF, very high frequency. Ultra high frequency was usually a station that was closer to you. The waves were a little shorter. You put that main one that had the 2, 4, 6, and 11, 13 on it. You put it on a U. Sometimes there was just a dot, and then you used the other dial to take you to Channel 22 UHF in Pittsburgh. WPTT. We had a Captain Pitt that presented cartoons. And once we discovered this was awesome. But a lot of times we had to put the tin foil, the aluminum foil, on the rabbit ears and turn them just right to get the channels in, and they would still be a little snow covered and crappy reception. But Channel 22, Channel 53, well, now Channel 22 is the one that had wrestling on it, and we immediately fell in love with it. And this was when wrestling was breaking away. WWF, the McMahons were smart. They bought up a lot of the territories. It used to be wrestling was a thing for the old folk. And there was different territories depending on what region you lived in that you could watch on TV. The McMahons bought up a bunch of these territories. WWF, World Wrestling Federation, and brought a bunch of these great wrestlers together in one spot for us to watch. And that was awesome. We loved Hulk Hogan. All the kids did. Eat your vitamins, say your prayers, brother. You know, and things really took off for wrestling in that era, because a lot of these wrestlers were suddenly becoming mainstream. You know, Hulk Hogan, Jesse the Body Ventura, Roddy Piper. They were in movies. They were being put in movies, and they got huge. The kids loved them, and it was pretty much cut and dry back then. You had your good guys and your bad guys, your heroes and your heels. You knew what was what. It was scripted. As kids, we didn't know that. When you got older, you knew it. But these guys really were. I mean, they were on the road all the time. Very physical guys. They were really getting hurt, pulling off, as you know, pulling off these stunts for our entertainment. They weren't getting paid all that great, but they made Hulk Hogan their champion. And everybody loved Hulk Hogan. Now, the other person I want to talk about in this video is Andre the Giant. And he was one of my very favorites. And they always build him as, 7'4", 500 some pounds, has never been defeated, never been slammed, which he had been defeated and slammed back before the big popularity, but that's not how they build him now. And we were convinced, he was a good guy too. He was a hero like Hogan. These guys are buddies. And we were led to believe that also by things like later on it got so popular that we had the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling cartoon, and there he was, Andre the Giant and Hogan were good buddies. A little known fact. Now, Hulk Hogan and some of the wrestlers did the live segments of that cartoon, but they were voiced by different people in the actual cartoon. And it was the guy, the man that played Robert, and everybody loves Raymond, Raymond's brother Robert, who did the voice for the animated version of Hulk Hogan and that. And but Hogan himself and the rest of them, they did the live segments in between the cartoons and stuff. But I mean, it got so big, there you have it. You had a cartoon. The wrestling album came out. I remember getting that at a local store with my paper out money. The cassette version I got of it, the very first album where the wrestlers were singing, and believe it or not, I Am a Real American by Derringer was originally meant for Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo, according to that album. I remember that, but eventually that song moved to Hulk Hogan. He was coming out to Eye of the Tiger from Rocky, since he was in the Rocky movie and everything. But it got so huge, eventually you had stars, TV stars and whatnot, pop music stars showing up. You had Mr. T coming into wrestling and stuff like that. It just got huge, bigger than it had ever been before. It was no longer, all adults watching this and little smoky wrestling rooms. It was huge. And the McMahons, they're the credit for that. They made wrestling huge. So you had action figures, and I had them. I had LJN made the big rubber action figures where if you beat them too hard, actually the paint came off. On mine, Hulk Hogan's whole crotch area was flesh color, but I'd try to repaint it with like temper paints and it would dry and crack off. But Hogan was the first one that I had. I didn't even have the other wrestlers for him to wrestle with at the time. So I had him wrestle my Grizzly Adams doll that my parents got me in like the late 70s. It was Grizzly Adams, and then Hogan accidentally broke his leg, snapped his hip joint clear off when I was making them wrestle. But I ended up with Hogan, Andre the Giant, Brutus Beefcake, who became Brutus the Barber Beefcake later. I had Classy Freddie Blassie. I had Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, George the Animal Steele. Who else? I had a bunch of those. And I guess that's a story for a different time, but at some point in the early 2000s, my wife decided to have a yard sale. I said, yeah, go ahead, sell some stuff. Well, she sold all them big rubber LJN wrestlers of mine for like $5 for all of them, and now they're worth, even beat up, they're worth in the hundreds of dollars, and wow, they're gone. She's gone. She's gone. They're gone. They're gone. But I had them, King Kong Bundy, and I had Big John Studd, and I would have them jump on Andre's sternum, and like that match that they had where they kept doing the big avalanche and big splash on Andre and hurting him. So we had the wrestling dolls. We had movies with the wrestlers in it. We had a cartoon. They had the thumb wrestlers, and I didn't really collect those, but my grandma did get me the Hillbilly Jim Big John Studd set. You put them on your thumbs and you made them wrestle, whatever. I had those. They're gone now too. But wrestling was huge. It got huge, and we found that channel and we're watching it every week. And there was another wrestling too. Was it AWA? I can't remember. The Von Erich family was on the other one, and that was fun to watch too, with the one man gang and all those guys. But it seemed a little cheaper at the time than WWF was, so we were big WWF fans. And I just adored Andre. They built him at 7'4", like I said, and I was always the bigger kid in the neighborhood, so. If we're going to pretend we're wrestling, well, I'm taller than all of them, so I must be Andre. Which in real life, I'm 6'4", so I'm smaller than most of the pro wrestlers at the time. Even Hogan, I think, in real life is like 6'7" or something like that. But Andre was one of my favorites. He was the greatest. And Hogan, and they were buddies, and they were billed as buddies. And then one day, at some point, they decided to make Andre turn heel. And from what I understand, the things that I've seen through the years, he didn't really want to turn heel, but he did it. He dedicated his life to the McMahons for what they did for him in the WWF. So he turned heel like they wanted. He didn't enjoy that, from what they say in the documentaries that I watched. All of a sudden people were booing him. He didn't enjoy that. But then he's on Piper's Pit with Hulk Hogan. And all of a sudden you see he's with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and he's a bad guy now, and Hogan doesn't understand, and Andre pulls the chain off of Hogan and rips his shirt off and leaves him bleeding, and Rowdy Piper's there, and old Piper was always the bad guy, but he was with Hogan, and he's like, Hogan, oh, what happened? You're bleeding. Are you okay? And this led to WrestleMania 3. And they were saying that Andre had never been slammed. Spoiler alert, he's going to be slammed. Of course, it was planned for the big picture, and that people were going to be surprised. Hogan was going to have to fight him. And then there's always the backstory you hear from all of these wrestlers. You didn't know with Andre what he was going to do, because he wouldn't tell them straight out. And you've heard stories, I've heard stories, that he even messed with Hogan. Hogan was like, are we going to do this? And he wouldn't answer him directly before the match, and was scaring the hell out of him. So Hogan didn't even know if Andre was going to pass the torch and let him pin him, let him slam him. And of course, it's history. He did. WWF WrestleMania 3 was huge, and we were all watching, and we were just like, oh. But Andre was the bad guy now, and he had gone through, I think, a surgery right before that. I think he was about ready. He should have been done with wrestling. At some point he did die of, I think it's heart disease, and he was only in his 40s. He wasn't that old of a man, but he was just a big man. That puts a lot of stress on your heart and whatnot. But wrestling, yes, I've said it a zillion times already, it was friggin' huge. And they got the kids into it, and the merchandising, and it was just crazy. So this wasn't intentional, but I haven't bought a wrestling game for years. And by years, I mean, I think the last wrestling game I had was for the original Xbox. And I just liked it because with the original Xbox, you could put your own CDs in and copy your own soundtracks of things and create a wrestler. So I had fun with that, creating wrestlers, me and my buddies, and putting in real music. I had Kiss Going Blind was my entrance music because, I like the Kiss music and stuff like that. Before that, of course, we did play wrestling games on the NES, the SNES, PlayStation 1, and the N64, and a lot of people say the N64 games were the very best. I didn't own one at the time. I owned the PS1, or the original PlayStation, but my brother had an N64, and when I would come home on leave from the service, I would play around on his N64, and he would play on my PlayStation to see what we were missing or whatever. So a lot of people claim that the best wrestling games were on the N64. That could be. I don't know. I do have some now for the N64 that I have now, but I haven't really messed with them much. I don't really know the wrestlers very much. Like in the 80s, I watched it and we believed everything. And, good guys, bad guys, that was great because you knew what you were in for. In the 90s, wrestling got a little bit more sleazier. WWF, a little sleazier, and questionable who was a good guy or bad guy in those ones. we ended up watching WCW wrestling, and they got a lot of the old wrestlers like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and Hulk Hogan became Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Eventually Bret Hart came over. So a lot of the old school wrestlers that we knew and liked were there. And we started watching that when I was in the Air Force, my wife and I, just because that's what everybody on base, my buddies, were doing. WCW would actually come close to where we were in North Dakota, when they were doing live matches, where WWF didn't. So a lot of my friends would actually drive to watch some of these. So we watched it for entertainment. We knew it was scripted by that point, but it was a soap opera. It was fun. And then the late 90s, 2000s on, I hadn't watched again. So I hadn't bought a wrestling game. I would see people review new ones and say they were terrible. They didn't like any of the new wrestling games. And then one day I happened to be on, I think, Twitter, and I saw Shady J from the Game Chasers doing a creative character, and he was making his brother Melvor. And I'm like, that looks just like Melvor. So I even asked him there, is the new 2K22 any good? And people told me, yes, it is. It's a good game. And then when I looked it up, I saw that you could be Hogan and Andre again in the game. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going to get this just so I can do that match, and so that I can create Mr. Poestyle in the game too. But so I got that a couple weeks ago. And I did. I created my own character. But I thought, it's just by chance, Video Games Monthly came the other day, and I got the first WWF home console game on it. And this is a game that I did rent, I believe. That or I borrowed it from a friend. One of the two. I did play this a little bit back in the day, and I remember playing as Andre. So I thought, well, why not? I have the newest game from 2K22 WWE with Andre and Hogan. Why not do a match with them in that, and do a match with them in the original that a lot of people hate? It's Acclaim, who is also LJN. LJN and Acclaim are the same. At that time, Nintendo kind of told you you can have 3 games come out a year. So a lot of these places like LJN had another division that they created, like Acclaim, so that they could get 6 games out a year instead of only the 3. So this one is Acclaim. I think the next one, the WrestleMania Challenge that came out, which is a better game. I don't have that physically in my collection, so I'm not adding that here. But it was LJN listed on there. And so I thought I would do a video with the very first time you could play as Hogan versus Andre, and the very latest game on my PS4. It's a 2K22 WWE Andre versus Hogan. So that's what we're going to do. But to show you how big they are, I am going to put a little montage here of commercials and clips from pop culture, from our history of how big wrestling got. They were putting these guys in commercials and stuff. And then the story, of course, of how Hogan got to slam Andre, and they didn't know if he was going to let him slam until the last second. And then when he was in the ring, supposedly Andre said to him, "Slam! Slam!" So he knew he was going to pass the torch. He was going to get the slam, do the leg drop, and pin Andre. And, that was it. So, but yeah, cartoons, records, and cassette, listening to the wrestlers sing, of all things. Things got huge. Cyndi Lauper came into the picture with Captain Lou Albano. He was in her videos. So she came into wrestling with Wendy Richter, the female champion for WWF at the time. And, so it was just, they were blasting us with wrestling at the time. And then on top of that, Cyndi Lauper does a video for the Goonies, the Goon Enough videos, and she has all the wrestlers on that. So check it out if you haven't. That's a funny thing to see. All the wrestlers chasing the Goonies around caves and stuff. But it was huge. Absolutely huge. And I was a sucker for it. When the NES came out, a little after wrestling started getting huge, and of course you were going to see some wrestling games. And it's not the greatest. There is no grapple system at all on this just a strike system. You could punch, and that's about it. You know, pro wrestling black box game for the NES, in my opinion, was the best wrestling game on there. Now, we did try the steel cage one that came out in like 92 or 93. I got that from Video Games Monthly a while back. I didn't play that one back in the day because by that point I was already into the Super Nintendo, so I didn't play that one, but I have played it recently, and it's okay, but there, you know, a lot of people are calling it the best WWF game on the NES. It's aight. It's not. Yeah. So we'll get to some of the pop culture things here. You can see the commercials and stuff that they did. And I think that's about it. We'll get to some gameplay from this and from 2K22, the WWE Wrestling. Me playing as Andre versus Hogan in both of those games. I think that's all I had to say. I don't know. I'm way off with this stuff, but without further ado, let's get ready to wrestle!
Now, another interesting note here. If you let the title screen of WrestleMania for the NES scroll past the title screen, you'll see that Rare worked on this game. Rare from GoldenEye, Battletoads, Banjo-Kazooie, and so I thought that was interesting. But even more interesting to me was to see the trademark for Hulk Hogan by Marvel. I had no idea that that was a thing at the time, and apparently, you know, I looked it up when Hulk Hogan was starting out as Hulk, I guess. They would bill him as the Incredible Hulk Hogan, and Marvel didn't like that. They ended up coming to an agreement. He stopped using the Incredible part. They called him the Immortal Hulk Hogan for a while, and Hogan had to pay Marvel $100 for every match that he wrestled until he was either done wrestling or for the next 20 years, and also had to pay them a percentage from sales of you know, his likeness, anything that came out after that. So at the time, I guess it probably wasn't a big deal, but over time, Hulkamania took off. Marvel must have really made a buttload of money off of Hulk Hogan. And another thing that I also read in there is there was a comic book where Hulk Hogan took on the Incredible Hulk. So I haven't seen that one for myself. I'm going to have to look that one up. But yeah, that was really interesting. I had no idea that Marvel was dipping into the Hulkamania there for 20 years. So, all right, here we go. Back to the show.
Come on, you guys. It's only a little.
Giant! A hungry giant!
Hungry for a big honey taste.
Big taste, honeycomb, big taste.
Honeycomb taste! Yeah, yeah, yeah!
It's not small.
No, no, no! Honeycomb's got a big honey taste. Big, big crunch for a big, big bite.
Honeycomb cereal. Part of this big, complete breakfast.
Honeycomb's a big, big bite. Yeah!
Big match at my house. I'll bring my guys. You have yours. I've got Junkyard Dog.
It's World Wrestling Federation Superstars.
I've got Brutus Beefcake. Here's George the Animal Steel. I've got Great Hammer Valentine. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat.
They're so real.
And Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Can you tell the difference? Wrestling Superstars, they're for real. Each sold separately from LJN.
Now watch me race the Macho Man with acclaimed Wrestlemania for the Nintendo Entertainment System. A leg drop, an elbow smash, a body slam!
WWF Wrestlemania from Acclaim.
Oh, yeah, I want a rematch.
He is the first true giant in the history of the WWE, the eighth wonder of the world. That's an understatement, Saxton. Andre makes grown men look like children.
The following contest is scheduled for one fall, making his way to the ring from Grenoble, France, weighing in at 520 pounds, the eighth wonder of the world, Andre the Giant!
When you talk about unmatched supremacy, you are looking at one of the building blocks of WWE in Andre the giant. I hope they reinforce the ring here tonight for the presence of Andre the Giant. Gentlemen, Hulkamania is about to run wild. There is only one, the Immortal.
And his opponent from Venice Beach, California, weighing in at 302 pounds, Hogan!
So between WCW and WWE, Hogan has had double-digit world title reigns. Not to mention he's a two-time WWE Hall of Famer and the biggest name in the business in the 80s and 90s. WWE Universe is going crazy. I don't understand why all this hot dogging and grandstanding already. The match hasn't even begun yet. Don't you know, Corey? Hogan feeds off the energy from the WWE Universe. It's going to power him through this match. And by the way, what you gonna do when Hulkamania goes down on you? That's pretty good, right? No. At least you and Hogan have the same hairline. You can feel it when Hogan enters the ring. There's no... Maybe that will set him up. Legs caught. Double axe handle. And look at this now. Yes, applying the submission hold. Targeting the shoulder with the claw. Our body is not meant to bend that way. For the love of God, submit. Escape and a takedown. Stomping. Ouch. Hogan's able to avoid that. Oh, headbutt right to the shoulder. That's using your noggin. Hulk Hogan knows all the tricks of the trade. Corey, what will Hogan have to do to survive this challenge and let Hulkamania run wild? Lest you forget the reign of Hollywood. We know that Hulk Hogan isn't above some rule breaking to get ahead. I think we'll see Hogan do anything tonight to score the win. Big reversal from the Hulkster. Hey, you can't do that. Hulkster has flight in mind. To the sky. Big shoulder tackle. Such an underhanded tactic there. Measured knee drop. And now he's going to lock in the submission. Targeting the shoulder with the clip. Escape and a takedown. Kick right to the back of the leg. What a kick. Perfect kick. Did you hear that impact? And as Draped across the top rope. Clubbing forearm.
And the Giant can't stop any offense coming his way.
The bear hug cinched in. Gotta find a way out and catch your breath. Under this, no quit whatsoever. Raining on elbows and escaping the bear hug.
That's one of the reasons the Giants conquered everyone. Stick kick. Continues to
This is a big win for them here, and a must-win match. Mark your calendar, gentlemen. We just witnessed a Giant be toppled in front of our very eyes.
So there you have it. That was the WWF back in the day. I was terrible at both games. Full disclosure, I had only played that new one, the WWE 2K22, once before, and that was 2 weeks ago when I bought it. And probably most of the time I played it, I spent 4 to 6 hours creating my own character before I finally did a match. So I didn't get to learn all of the moves. And also, in the Wrestlemania, I didn't know all the moves, obviously. There's different pin patterns for that game. I didn't know what they were. Not that I even got to that point. I wrestled Hogan, who was the hardest in the whole thing. I didn't know how to even climb up on the ropes. If you're wondering, we found later that the easiest way is you have to get on the turnbuckles closest to you. And we did it by doing the run move and then pressing the B to get on it. We tried B, like other people had been saying on the internets, to get up on that rope and different configurations, and it was random. Once in a blue moon we would do it, but if we ran towards that turnbuckle and hit B, we were able to get up on there pretty quick. But Hogan would just never ever lose his energy. Me as Andrea, I was losing my energy left and right, and all you could do is punch, kick, and headbutt and try to get your special at the top, which for Andrea was a big foot. For Hogan it was a crucifix. Yeah, brother. So I sucked at it. I sucked at the 2K22 for you, but at least you got to see them both. the very first Andre versus Hogan video game for the NES from back in 1989, even though WrestleMania 3 was what? 87? We're talking 35 years since WrestleMania 3, since that slam happened. At the end of this month, it'll be the 35th year anniversary. We're getting close within a couple weeks of that, or a week of that, or I don't even know where we're at anymore. I'm out there. But it was fun. I had a lot of fun playing it, and my son and I have since played more of the old WrestleMania game, and we tried the WrestleMania Challenge. I don't have the physical copy. We tried it on emulator and the steel cage one. I didn't record those for this. And there was also one that came out on the Xbox. It was Legends of Wrestling. I remember at the time I thought about getting it. It looked pretty good. I think it got bad reviews. Money was tight. I didn't end up buying it. I should have bought it at the time because you could also do the Andre versus Hogan match there. And it looked more true to the WrestleMania 3. I think they came down in the little versions of the ring with Bobby the Brain Heenan and stuff for the entrance. This one here, the newer one, has Hogan as Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I don't believe you can get an original Hogan for the new 2K. I think they have the Hollywood Hulk Hogan like you saw with the boa, and he's doing the guitar strumming and stuff. And he had the 5 o'clock shadow around his mustache and stuff. And I think the other version you can get on there is him with the NWO gear, which that version of the game cost a lot more, in the hundreds of dollars there. Compared to just buying a regular version of the game, and I didn't buy that. But I did always like that, and I liked the NWO, and then they came out with the NWO Wolfpack. Ding, 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 ding. Remember that in the 90s? So then you had 2 NWOs and whatnot, but it's a lot of fun. I had fun playing it, whether it's a bad game or not. I did terrible at both of them. Let me know what you remember about the heydays of wrestling from the 80s. Do you remember? Or are you too young to remember that? Are you just finding this stuff out now? Probably not. You're probably a geezer like me. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you on the next one. Oh, Nacho. Come here, Nacho. No biting. No bite. Ooh, no biting. Oh, Nacho, stop.